Very good afternoon. Um, Till now, what we have seen are some of the steps of conducting a systematic review and meta-analysis. We saw how to formulate the problem and then conduct a literature search by building a search strategy for different databases, screening the potentially eligible studies, wherein we first screen the title and the abstract, followed by the full text screening. And the next step, which we are going to discuss now, is about data extraction. So as before we go to the data extraction, we all are already well versed with the Prisma flowchart, in which we depict the entire search flow, the number of articles which we could obtain from different databases, and what were the results of the two-stage screening process, and ultimately how many studies were included in the review and how many were included in the meta-analysis. When we talk about data extraction, we have to remember that for an SRMA, the unit of interest is a study. So we need to identify and record relevant information about each study and then extract data from each of these included studies in a predetermined and a structured format. Because these data are going to help us with our descriptive analysis, our meta-analysis. All our tables, figures will be based on the data in this data extraction sheet. And therefore, data extraction becomes very important. However, compared to the steps till now, data extraction is a more complex and a time-consuming process. The data extraction form itself is longer and more complex than the screening guides, which can have 4 to 5 questions. This data extraction is also to be done by a pair of investigators who work independently to extract data from the studies which have been included in the systematic review. These team members need to be trained. The data extraction form is then pilot tested and then revised as per the feedback from the team members. If needed, coding of some variables can also be done. So in the pilot itself, there may be some conflicts between the team members who are working on the data extraction. So these need to be resolved through regular team meets or by the third investigator. Then, of course, once all the data has been extracted, you have to prepare the data by cleaning it, identifying the missing data, and deciding how to handle the missing data before you move ahead with any analysis, especially the meta-analysis. All of these steps have to be transparently reported in the methods section. Now, when you want to extract data, what are the kinds of data you would like to capture from these different studies? So one, of course, is the details about the study per se, the characteristics of the studies. You would like to describe the participant characteristics. If it is an intervention study, describe the details of the intervention and the comparator. Then, of course, the outcomes. How are the outcomes measured? What tools and units were used? And then the results of the study. When you want to do the data extraction, the first point of interest or the domain of interest is the study per se, in which you jot down the study ID, the author, the year of study and the year of publication, and then some details about the study design. Might be what is the study design per se, what are the number of study sites, whether it's a multi-centric study, in which country the study was conducted, the location in which the study was conducted, any special distinct characteristics of the participants which can be included in the next domain of participant characteristics. But you need to jot down the details of the study per se in this domain. So what I'm showing you here is that in Excel, you can have different worksheets for different domains. So first one could be for study methods, another could be for participants, followed by intervention and control, outcome, and the results. So that your Data sheet is not very long and complex. You can split it up into different worksheets, which makes it more manageable. So you can see for study methods, you can talk about the details of the study. This is another example of how you can have a more detailed data extraction sheet for the study. The next is the details of the participants. So usually apart from the setting and the countries, and you need to mention the eligibility criteria, the inclusion exclusion criteria, or if there is any diagnostic criteria to include the participants in the study. And very commonly you report the age in terms of mean standard deviation or median and interquartile range, the sex, that is a proportion of men and women included in the study, presence or absence of comorbidity, socioeconomic status, or any other variable of interest pertaining to participant depending upon your research question. So your next data sheet could be about participants in which you collect such kind of data. Another domain is the intervention and the control for intervention studies. So you have to collect details of the intervention as well as the control. So for the intervention, it could be what were the components, routes of delivery, the regimens, doses, timing, frequency, the duration of the intervention, then the staff qualification about the persons who are giving the intervention, the equipment which was used, etc. And similar details about the control, that is whether a placebo was used or whether a standard uh, care was provided or there was no intervention. So those details need to be captured in your data extraction sheet. So again, this is a data extraction sheet wherein the details of the intervention and the controls could be extracted using these variables. Then you have the outcomes. Now here in this sheet, you have to mention the details of the tools which were used to assess the outcome, the definitions and the criteria, the scales and the metrics which were used, and how were the outcomes reported, whether they were reported, if it's a continuous variable, might be they are summarized as mean and standard deviation. If they are categorical variables, might be proportions have been reported. The timing of the outcome measurement should also be noted out. In addition, you may be interested in complications or adverse outcomes. So how were they collected? Were they collected proactively, systematically, or was it voluntary reporting on the part of the participants? So again, you can have a data extraction sheet for the outcomes. Then comes the results. So for each group and for each outcome at each point, you have to mention the number of participants who were randomly assigned to either of the groups that were included, how many were assigned and how many were included in the analysis. Then whether there was any attrition and if any reasons for attrition were mentioned. And then it is a good idea to report the details of the number of people included and the number of people who experienced the outcome in a for the dichotomous data in a 2 by 2 table in which you depict it as in a row form. And if it is continuous data, mention the mean and the standard deviation for each of the intervention and the control group. Sometimes you could also note down the between group estimates, that is the effect estimates in terms of risk ratio, odds ratio, or mean difference. And then if subgroup analysis, if you want to do more, advanced analysis, you may have to collect or extract information which are necessary for those kinds of analysis. So this is an example of a data extraction sheet in which you are collecting data for the results in the study. So you can see that the number of people who were there in each of the arms, the number of people who experienced the outcome, and might be summary data in terms of mean standard deviation if it is quantitative data. When you are planning to do data extraction, it is important that you design your data extraction form carefully and arrange the variables in a logical order, meaning that in the order in which you would expect them to appear in the manuscript. So when you're reading the article, you know that the bibliographic information is going to be at the beginning of the article, followed by the study design characteristic, participant characteristics, details of the intervention, data collection procedures, data collection instruments and measures in the method section. Then comes the results section. So you design your data extraction sheet in this order so that you can comfortably extract the data. Remember that when you are extracting the data, the first few articles, it will be a big challenge, but once you settle down and you understand what are the various variables you're interested in, it can become more quicker and easy. So it's a good idea usually instead of just extracting data on the effect estimate, you try and extract the raw data in terms of the numbers who were included in the study and the numbers with the event of interest. Again, what you are doing in your data extraction sheet, it is similar to a master chart in which you are creating a flat file in which it's a two-dimensional matrix. Each row is for a study and the column headings are the variable headings you are interested in. The unit of analysis is a study and you identify the study using an ID and then you give the details of the study in each row. So this is an example in which there are just 3 studies, but these 3 studies had multiple reports and in each report there were multiple outcomes. So you can just see that with 3 studies, there are multiple rows which are reporting these multiple outcomes in multiple reports generated from it with these 3 studies. So when we took the on-site session, we had this hands-on activity in which this article was shared and the participants had to prepare a data extraction sheet and then extract the data for this article by M. Bunker in the Indian Journal of Tuberculosis. This you can try out yourselves. So this was the data extraction sheet which we developed, and then all the participants read the article and extracted the data. One important point is that when you're extracting data, it is a good idea to highlight the different parts from which you are extracting the data with a comment about what is the data you are extracting, because later on, if there is any discussion or discrepancy, you can easily go to those sections of the article without wasting any time. That is an important part. Another important point for data extraction is that you can copy and paste certain sections from the article into the relevant cells. If there is too much of text, say in the inclusion or there is a long list of exclusion criteria, you can copy and paste those sections from the article into the cells of your data extraction sheet. Again, remember that data extraction is to be done by 2 people independently, and it is then checked whether they are coherent, and if there is any discordance, then by arbitration or by discussion, we try and resolve those issues. Once you extract the data, when you are extracting the data, and then you'll have a look at the data extraction sheet, you also need to decide whether you want to stop at the systematic review or whether you want to move ahead with a meta-analysis. So these points we will cover in our session on meta-analysis. So I think what we have done in this session is we have tried and discussed how to design a data extraction sheet and what are the different variables which are required for data extraction in an SRMA and how to do the data extraction. So in the next session, we will move ahead with the meta-analysis. Thank you.